Welcome to today's In Conversation session for World Cultural Diversity for Dialogue and Development. I'm Liz Mayers, co-founder of EDI Accreditation. We're a bit like ISO certification for equality, diversity and inclusion. We measure EDI performance and provide a sort of kite mark of achievement. What we're most focused on is really encouraging best practice in the long term. It's not a tick box exercise. And because we don't sell other associated services, we have a brilliant community of members that do amazing work in this space to help our clients on the next stages of their journey. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by two of our brilliant community members to mark World Day for Cultural Diversity, Dialogue and Development by starting the dialogue. So if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourselves, Dianne?
Yes, hello, my name's Dianne Greyson. I am the founder of the hashtag Ethnicity Pay Gap campaign, and I'm also the director of Equilibrium Mediation Consulting.
Amazing, thank you. And Grace?
Hi everyone, I'm Grace Mosuro. I'm the founder of Quaint Consulting, an inclusion and culture consultancy. I'm also chair of trustees for a charity called Every Future Foundation, which is an anti-racism education charity. And there's loads of other stuff, but I think that's enough.
Amazing. Well, we couldn't have two more qualified people to talk to us about this today. So we all know that culturally diverse workplaces perform better. There's loads of research out there. They're more innovative, better at problem solving, result in higher customer satisfaction and loyalty, increase market share, and ultimately make the organisation more profitable. But it's only the case where everyone is actually included, has that sense of belonging, and is able to show up as their real selves. So with diversity and inclusion initiatives coming under lots of pressure of late, I think it's really important that any dialogue about cultural diversity in the workplace is now not just talk, but really moves us into the development phase and is about meaningful, intentional action that brings positive change to workplaces. So, panel. What does improving cultural diversity look like to you? We'll go alphabetically. So let's start with Dianne again.
Okay. Well, for me, it's about everybody feeling included. You know, no matter where you are, what level you are, because although people sometimes focus on the middle, you know, there are issues at the top and the bottom as well. So everybody should feel included. We should all have shared values and have respect for each other. If those types of things are evident, I believe that the organisation will be on the right trajectory to have a positive organisation. Because, you know, at the end of the day, I've said many times, you know, people are the organisation. So we need to look after our people and we need to get some understanding and respect. If those two things fall down, then organisation is going backwards.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And what about for you, Grace?
So there are a few things here for me. I think the first one is just having and communicating the awareness of what cultural diversity actually means, because I think sometimes people misinterpret, you know, does that mean just having a diverse team, as in, you know, I've got multiple races that work in my organization. But when we talk about culture, we're talking about something that's a little bit different. And that's about actually, where are the people that work in your organization from? So, you know, I know many people, like Black people that are friends of mine that were born and bred in the UK. So a lot of their culture is very British. But then when we're thinking about cultural diversity, we want to think about actually, is our workforce culturally diverse? As in, have we got world voices involved? Have we got cultures from around the world involved? You know, Dianne and myself, we're both Black women, but we are from different cultures, right? So are we seeing that representation in organizations? I think for me, that's what's really important. And are we communicating what that means within organizations, as in, this is what we mean by cultural diversity. It's not just about race, right? I think you both touched on this as well. I'm not sure if it's before we started recording, but it is also that question about, are we looking and asking who's missing You know, like if we're saying we want to be culturally diverse, are we aware of the makeup of our teams and our organization? And are we consciously trying to close any gaps in terms of who isn't there? And I think it's one of those things where, you know, you need to be constantly working on this. So my view is that if we want to achieve and improve cultural diversity within organizations, then leaders and recruiters shouldn't be resting until the answer is that no one is missing, right? We are culturally diverse, and we can say that where there is a customer need from this culture, we have people within our organization are able to meet that. I think there's another one that's really close to my heart in terms of improving cultural diversity is around this fear of mispronouncing someone's name, and therefore I just won't invite them to an interview. Can we just normalize the idea of having so many people from cultures, you know, that have those difficult sounding names, so that when you don't know how to pronounce a name, you can call on someone within your organization to teach you. So we're not then leaving people with, you know, differently pronounced names, you know, like my Yoruba name isn't easy for everyone to pronounce, but if there was a Nigerian in the organization that I'm applying to, then, you know, as a recruiter, I can reach out to a couple of those individuals to say, please, can you tell me how to pronounce this name so I can try and get it right? So I think things like that are things that I'd say and that I feel personally improve cultural diversity.
I'm sorry, may I add that not only that, if that person is trying to get into an organisation and that person's got a very good CV, isn't it incumbent on you to bring the person and say, hello, whoever you are, I just want to make sure I've pronounced your name right.
Absolutely.
And then mention it. And if the person said, well, no, actually, it's the go, okay, so I'm so sorry. So, you know, you've got to make the effort. And what
I was going to say, as a white person, with a very easy name, you know, it's 3 letters, you can't go far wrong with that. Google. If you Google, how do you pronounce?
Yeah, it's making an effort, right?
It gives you an audio, right? And then my first opening line is always, have I pronounced that? In fact, I think, Dianne, when we were first talking, I worked with somebody who had the same spelling as you, but was Dianne rather than Dianne. And so I always go, ask. Getting to the age I am, I have to write a lot of stuff down so that I remember it, because otherwise I end up asking 5 times, which is really rude. But I just think it's not rocket science, right?
It really isn't. It's about making an effort. And I think that's where a lot of organisations fall down. The lack of effort they make causes problems to occur. And another thing Grace is touching on quite a lot was about cultural intelligence. Understanding who you've got in your organisation and understanding dealing with one person is not necessarily the same way of dealing with another person. Somebody once said to me that a manager was getting angry at an African lady because she spoke in such a passionate voice. It's not that she was angry, it's just that her response was very, you know, her voice was slightly raised and it was firm. And he felt threatened by that because he didn't understand. He didn't make an effort because they, you know, it's like you have to go to where they are at. They won't go to where you are at, or meet in the middle. You know what I mean? So there's understanding on both sides.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. We talked about understanding who's missing, and I think quotas is one of the contentious issues that often comes up when you're talking about understanding the demographics and inviting people that are missing into the organisation. So what do we think about quotas? Good, bad?
Good, bad, or indifferent? I think maybe there needs to be another terminology. I think the word quota is like offensive to some people. I understand it. Yes, I do understand it. I was working as a consultant for an organisation, and there was somebody else who was there as a consultant, and she said the only reason why we were there is because we were black. I'm like, no, you know, I actually am here because, you know,
I'm really well qualified.
You know what I mean? Exactly. And I think that I find that offensive if that's what you think the organisation feels, because that's quite poor. However, you know, what's the tagline on applications these days? We welcome applications from ethnic minorities. That's the way of getting a quota, isn't it? And I think by doing something that is welcoming to get the people in is a very good thing. And if that means somebody wants to label it quotas, then that's all good.
Yeah, what do you think, Grace?
I agree in terms of we need to rename it, but I love the concept of it. I think that as a people, particularly in business, if we don't have a target to work towards, we're just not going to do it. I think when we look at like things like health and safety and compliance, even performance, right? All of them have got targets attached to them. And that's how people achieve those numbers. And that's how people kind of keep those front and center for themselves in terms of their everyday thinking and what they're doing in their work. So I think we definitely need them. Speaking from personal experience, I know that I don't know for a fact because no one told me, but I'm pretty sure that my first professional job, I was part of a quota in terms of recruitment for that. So my first professional job was going into a recruitment company, and I was the second Black woman recruited onto that floor. And then another one was recruited while I was there. But there were hundreds of people in that organization. And I was the only Black person recruited in my grad scheme intake. Another Black girl then joined in the second intake. But I know for a fact that we were recruited. I don't know for a fact. I assume we were recruited as part of a quota, right? Especially because we didn't have a track record. We were fresh out of university. We didn't have any experience. It was very much like, let's give these ladies a chance. And I'm grateful for that, because whilst I abhor the fact that, we are not necessarily, in some spaces as Black women, we're not seen as having equal value as some people or capabilities. But I appreciate the fact that in that instance, a quota gave me the opportunity to come into an organization and show that actually I'm just as good, if not better, than some of these people. And I think that when we're working in spaces where there is that lack of diversity, there's that lack of understanding, sometimes we need initiatives like quotas to really give people a fair opportunity. So I love them, but I think we should call them something different. Let's just call them measures, Let's call them.
May I also add, I actually was part of I was a consultant working for the Met Police many years ago. And they did a quota scheme to get Black and Asian and other ethnic minorities into the police, because obviously there aren't many of us there. I can't say how successful or not successful that was, or say I was part of it. So, it's something that organisations do. Some do it great, some do it very, very badly. And I think there has to be a lot of education about how to do it and how to do it respectfully. So somebody doesn't then say to you, oh, you are a diversity hire.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think particularly with everything Trump's doing at the moment, that is, it's damaging. I've got a very good friend, an Asian woman. She works for an American IT company. She is in technical sales. She has smashed her targets every year. She's always, platinum circle winner and this kind of thing. And the American company, this was pre-Trump, had done a bit of D&I work in the US, and they'd decided that women of colour were underrepresented. And as a result, they were going to make a huge announcement about what they were doing to address this deficit that had clearly arisen through racism over the years. And they made this big song and dance about, oh, we're going to address this. And at the same time, my friend got a promotion that she was really due, really qualified for, and really deserved. But because of that announcement from the US, for the first time in her career, she went, do I deserve it? Am I just part of a numbers game? But also what it did for all her white, particularly male colleagues, they all went, well, typical. Rather than going, actually, she's been smashing it for years. This is about time. And it destabilized the whole organization because ultimately she left.
Yeah.
Because she
This
didn't
is
want to
what
be
I
viewed
mean.
by like as that by her peers. And a lot of the men left too, because they were like, well, what's the point in being here? Because we're never going to get promoted because we're not black women. So it was done so badly. It was really, really detrimental to the business.
Mm.
But I still maintain they're really good things. They need to happen.
I think so as well. And I think, like Dianne said about, you know, some organizations are doing it badly and they need support to do it the right way. I think a big a great starting point is communicating the why to the organization. And I think most organizations fail to do that before they make these big announcements. It's like, actually tell you know, put the figures out on the table, share with everyone what is the demographics of our organization, what's missing, and what are we going to do to address that. And I also think, just in the instance of your friend, it makes me feel really sad, because that's a big part of the trauma that we're trying to unlearn as Black women, is the stories we start to tell ourselves because of what we've been told for so many years. And it's really, really difficult to unlearn all of that. And just how triggering, you know, messages from the likes of Trump and Elon about diversity hires, and, you know, a diversity hire was the reason the helicopter went down in Washington, DC, and things like that. It's, you know, many of us have done the work to unlearn some of that, but it is a daily journey. So when you've got messaging like that coming in, it's just adding to that trauma, and there's just more for us to unpack and to unlearn. And that's why I always say that Black women never get to switch off, because we're constantly navigating the negative messaging that we receive, and having to retell our story so that it's the truth that's coming out, you know, and rise above so much. And all of this is exhausting.
It is.
Definitely. And I think that again really lends itself to why it's so important that within an organization you are not the only one. You know, there is a community, there is that that difference that can be celebrated and valued amongst, you know, everyone in the team.
So I'm sure Grace can attest to this herself. I've been in many organisations where I've been the only one, and then as soon as I see another Black person, I'm like, oh my God, it's a Black person. In my mind, I won't go pointing, but I'm like, or an Asian, you know, somebody who wasn't white, like, oh. And the excitement is palpable.
Definitely.
Because you feel like there is somebody who looks like you or not too dissimilar to you that you can relate to, and you don't have to conform. Because I think, I would say for me, I didn't conform too much, but I recognised that I was being pushed into doing things that I didn't necessarily want to do, like go to the pub every Friday, because that's just not me, you know. And you know, do things that I'm like, that's not really me. You know, that's not
it's
my
that code switching, isn't it? It's that feeling you have to modify your behaviours, your appearance, your language, your whatever, just not to rock the boat and not to be seen as different or awkward, or and that just shouldn't be happening. I think I don't know if either of you are familiar with, in the NFL in America, they introduced the Rooney Rule years ago. And that was quite a subtle way of working with quotas, because obviously the NFL, a lot of American football players are Black. But when you looked at the management and the leadership side of the teams, they were all white.
Like UK football.
Yeah, absolutely. And what they introduced was the Rooney Rule, nothing to do with Wayne Rooney, and it meant that teams were obligated to interview one Black person on a shortlist. They had to interview at least one Black person alongside any other candidates. And actually what's happened over time, it's been very gradual. Arguably it should have been quicker, but that representation has shifted and changed. And I think those are the kind of ways that actually an organisation can approach that type of thing, quotas or measures or whatever we call it, to understand this isn't a knee-jerk, right, overnight we need to hire 3 Black people.
Yeah, I think it's it's a tricky one, because if you don't fix the system, even if you do have, initiatives like disability confident and, the Rooney Rule, they still have to come and be interviewed by potentially a white panel who have no lived experience, no experience of working with people from, marginalized backgrounds, and they're still interviewed in a way that contains bias. So, that can sometimes add to the trauma even more, because, is that panel then coming to the interview going, oh, I've just got to interview this person because of the Rooney Rule, or I've got to interview this person because they were guaranteed an interview because of, because we're disability confident, etc. So I think there's a bigger piece, and that's why we talk about how do we build inclusion throughout the employee life cycle within an organization? Because, the interview is just the first step, right? And if there's bias and discrimination built into every other layer of that life cycle, then they're just doomed.
Yeah.
And I think they have to look at, you have to also look at the community that your organization is in. Okay, well, London is very diverse. So every single organisation should be reflecting that. There is no excuse whatsoever. If you go further afield, okay, there's probably less of us, Black people, Asian people, or any other ethnic group, but we exist. So there might, as long as there's a few that reflects that, then that's fine. But this nonsense of having, let's say, a department that has only white people in, let's say, London, is ridiculous. And for I spent, before I became who I am today, I spent 16 years in recruitment, and I had organisations telling me, I can't find these people, and the problem you can't find them is because you're not making an effort. You're not having conversations with people in your organisation, Black, Asian, whoever you're looking to bring in, and asking, where would you go if you were? And if you don't make, and for me, it's about, if an organisation is not making an effort, how can you expect things to change?
Also, I think it's really important, your shop window, because so through the accreditation, we look at representation across all elements of the business. We take into account regional differences, and how really show an organisation how they compare with the local demographics and the local population. So whether that's about ethnicity, or whether that's disability, or LGBTQ, religion, etc. So once they've got that insight, what always kind of frustrates me when you speak to an organisation, they go, we advertise, they don't apply, they clearly don't exist. And you go, they look at your advert, then probably they look at your website, and then they choose not to apply. It's not because they don't exist, it's because what they see doesn't attract them.
Exactly.
They're not invited. There was one client, and their meet the team page, it was a homogenous sea of white men.
And an example of that was, I used to be a trustee of an organisation called Certitude, and the only reason why I put an application in is because I saw people who looked like me, and other ethnic groups. Because when I looked at others, they were, as you described, a snowy white peak, and and even in the, if you think about the service provision. The service provision that you're giving these people, they were white. So they're trying to say, Certitude was about mental health and learning disabilities. So if there was a contrast organisation who had a white board, are you telling me that there are no other groups apart from white groups that have those experiences? So to me, that's an offence. And I would go, there is absolutely no way on earth that I would apply for a position in that organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Agreed. So what do you think are some of the, I mean, we've already touched on some shocking examples already, but what are some of the mistakes and challenges that organisations make when they're going, right, we want to improve diversity here? How do they get it wrong?
I would say fundamentally they don't listen to their employees. They don't see what's going on in their organisation, and all they're thinking about is their bottom line, and they're not seeing the impact of the unfair treatment that's occurring in some organisations. I've had people evidence to me how they've been racially discriminated, and they've complained, and then they go down the disciplinary route for complaining, you know, and the organisation do nothing about it. When you get situations like that, it's appalling, and that's, you cannot expect to live like that as an organisation continuously. However, the organisation I have in my head still exists and is doing okay, thank you. However, the complaints continue and continue and continue. And, retrospectively, they've got to look at what's happening externally. The riots that happened not too long ago, the white people went mad and started attacking people like myself and Grace and others. There was one organisation, somebody sent a notification saying their organisation gave them no support through that. No support. Yeah. Okay. They didn't recognise how scared they were, and they just left them. And things like that are appalling, and are situations that are causing organisations not to be seen as an organisation of choice. And organisations need to recognise when there are issues within an organisation, you need to look and reflect and see what best you can do for your employees, and never assume. As I mentioned earlier, that I'm founder of the Ethics Pay Gap campaign. One of the things I say is, communication is key, right?
Yeah.
And you should not be saying after the fact, i.e., you've done your report, and say, "Oh, this is what it is, and this is the gap," without speaking to your employees. And this is where I think organisations fall down. They do not have conversations, meaningful conversations that help the organisation.
Do you think it's because they're afraid? Do you think they think, oh God, we can't open that can of worms, I can't say that? Because
partly yes, partly that some of them don't care. Let's be honest, and I think this sugarcoating of situations does not help. You just go, oh well, maybe they didn't mean that. Check if that's what they meant or did not mean. Don't assume that that's the case.
Yeah, definitely. Grace, in your experience, what do you think some of the biggest mistakes organisations have made?
I think there are a few. I think Dianne's point about the race riots in August last year is a significant one. We saw that most of the organisations that did respond in a timely manner, they responded quickly because they had diverse representation on their boards. So they had people who were experiencing that fear, who knew what it felt like, and therefore who wanted to make sure that everyone that looked that looked like them and had a similar lived experience within the organisation felt supported. But also they wanted to educate people that didn't look like them and weren't afraid to say, check in on your people. There are friends, family that are really scared right now, and they need to know that you're with them. So that's just one point. I think for me, I talk about this a lot. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see too many organizations still making is this singular focus policies. Like, yes. We're really passionate about gender diversity, and we've got gender diversity policy. We've got a disability diversity policy. We very rarely see organizations pushing and kind of presenting racial equity policies on their websites, right? Or intersectional policies. So I think that singular focus means that a lot of people with intersecting identities are left behind. I know when I worked in the corporate space, I saw many, many women progress into senior leadership roles. But as a Black woman, I was always left behind. And that's because the organization was so focused on gender that they didn't look beyond that. So I saw so many white women get promoted in the organization, and I was always, always just there like, hello.
Yeah.
No.
It's quite interesting you mentioned that, Grace, because I also had that as a point to mention. And for years, I have seen that gender is the thing. Okay, diversity, gender, it's all about gender, and they see that as a quick fix. And, they can hide the fact, and I'm not saying all organisations do it, but they can hide the fact that they're focusing on white women and they're not focusing on anyone else besides them. But they can then tick that box that they've done something for diversity, which is a shame, because as you said, Grace, you're like, hello, I'm here, don't forget me. I am just as good as that person you've just promoted. And
Absolutely.
I think there needs to be more emphasis about intersectionality, particularly because, again, as Grace said, being a Black woman, and I'm actually a Black woman who's also neurodiverse. So, I've got three things going on right now, you know what I mean? And organisations need to see there are people who are like me and like Grace, and even more so, that they need to look at and see how best to help and support them.
And this I think for us was always central in when we were designing the accreditation. No one is ever just one thing.
No.
Throughout my career, I've been the young girlie that's ignored and talked over in meetings because she's got nothing relevant to say. Then I was the pregnant one that missed out on opportunities and promotions because I was clearly going to want to stay at home forever and just be chained to the kitchen sink. And now I'm the mad old menopausal one that can't remember her own name half the time. So, throughout my career, and I think it's the same with, when people talk about disability as well, you can actually have invisible disabilities that people may be completely unaware of if you haven't felt safe enough to disclose that to an organisation. But also things happen. You can break your leg and have a temporary disability or challenge with mobility. You can have a diagnosis of something that actually really is quite life impacting. And if an organisation hasn't gone out of its way to say to its people, male, female, non-binary, Black, white, Asian, disabled, able-bodied, neurodiverse, or not, we're here to support you and work with you to help you thrive. I just think it's really narrow-minded if you're looking through one lens all the time.
Exactly, and it's such a win-win situation, if you are that type of organisation, because the more you behave in that manner, the more productivity you're going to get from the people that are within the organisation. Simple.
Yeah, I've just got I wanted to just add a couple of things. So just on that neurodiversity tip, right? One of the things that is frustrating the life out of me at the moment is, sometimes I'm always looking out for opportunities, right? So I'm always looking out for NED roles and trustee roles and things like that. And it's really frustrating me that many organizations have decided to try and be really slick and change the application processes. So instead of a cover letter, some of them are asking you like these fun and quirky questions, answer these 2 or 3 questions as part of your application. Now, as a woman with ADHD who has managed to get my head around a cover letter and just about, can pull one together now and do it really well, you've now introduced something completely different, which means I'm not going to apply for this because my head can't take it. I've checked out because the anxiety is peaked. I'm panicking. Am I doing this right? All of that. So I get that organizations are doing that because, they're trying to catch people out with using AI for applications. I use AI to write my cover letter, and I do that because I have ADHD and brain fog as a side effect from chemotherapy. And AI helps me to translate my CV and my actual lived experience into a cover letter that hits all of the marks in terms of the points there. It doesn't make stuff up. It doesn't make up any experience. It doesn't do whatever. So I think organizations just need to think about what they're doing with these new application processes, because to me, they don't make sense, firstly. Now, the other two mistakes that I think organizations make in this space is exhausting their own leads, right? Because you haven't spent the time recruiting enough people from culturally diverse backgrounds, you then will exhaust and drain the one or two that you have in the organization. They will be the one that you parade out at events. They will be the ones that you may take all the pictures and be on the company website, but they won't be the ones that you promote, right? So I think it's just really important that organizations recognize when they're doing that and think about the fact that they need to stop it. And how are they going to change that? And then the other one we've all touched on already is this, I just can't find the candidates. They're just not there.
Yeah, they don't exist.
They are. If they're not applying for your roles, it's because they don't see themselves in your organization, or they feel like the wording in the advert doesn't invite them to apply. So there's a piece of work you need to do to go out and find them, because they are definitely there.
Yeah, and also the fact of where are you advertising has a lot to do with it too. Have you made the effort to look at where people like myself will go to look, which might be in the general Indeed and whatever type of website there is these days. It might be that, but equally there might be something special. Absolutely. That we go to. So again, as I said earlier, it's about doing the work. Do the work. If you really want us, us very intelligent, smart individuals who can make your organizations better, do the work. And once you've done the work, we will do the work for you.
Definitely.
Absolutely. I mean, this is again, Dianne, I think it was you that was said something about they're always thinking about their bottom line. Actually, if they were really smartly thinking about their bottom line, what they would be looking at is the cost that not doing this is creating for them. And actually, I had a really interesting, I went to an event a couple of weeks ago, and they were actually talking about the cost to an organization in getting this wrong, of having disengaged employees. They weren't specifically looking through an ethnicity lens, but they were talking about disengaged employees. And we know that, purpose, values, all that alignment helps with engagement, as does that sense of belonging. And actually just having disengaged people was staggering.
And not only disengaged, angry people, because exactly, because there are people, as I said earlier, people are being heavily discriminated in organisations, and they're angry. They are mentally distressed. They're burnt out. They are walking around like zombies because their organisations are not helping and supporting them. And this thing called about duty of care, a lot of organisations not even thinking about that.
Yeah, and ultimately, they'll leave, and you will find it harder to attract the best talent because not everybody wants you. If you're narrowing your reach so significantly by not doing this kind of work. So I think we've kind of meandered through a lot of the good stuff and the bad stuff here. But what would be your sort of takeaways for how an organisation can really get this right, how they should be approaching this challenge?
I'm not going to say anything long-winded. I think one thing I'll say is you just got to be intentional. Be intentional about what you're going to do. Recognise what the situation is within your organisation and be intentional about fixing it and creating an environment that everybody can achieve and aspire, feel comfortable, have the security. I think if people just look at those basic things, organisations will change just like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Grace, what would be your suggestion?
So I would agree with Dianne, of course. I think organizations need to understand their starting point, right? So I think every organization should be doing an audit of where are we with cultural diversity and inclusion in our business. So you can understand your starting point and where you want to get to, and you can measure your progress, and you can bridge gaps, etc. But I also think that when we think about a lot of organizations promote people based on the fact they've done a really good job in a role, right? They don't necessarily equip them to be managers and to be leaders, and particularly to be inclusive leaders. So I think it's important that actually inclusivity is built in as a leadership KPI. It's a requirement of that role. So if we're looking at people if we're starting to succession plan within our organization, let's think about how are we building in training around cultural competency, around diversity and inclusion, etc., so that our leaders are naturally that when they move into those roles. And I think the other thing is name the problem. I think too many organizations are shying away from naming the fact that they lack cultural diversity. They're just not saying it. So instead, they're really pushing cultural diversity days and, making a massive fuss and putting loads of money into these events and giving their ERGs like big pots of money to host these fabulous events. But they're not actually stating that there is a problem around a lack of cultural diversity within their organizations. So you're kind of half in and you're half out. I need you to be all in. Name the problem.
And for me, I think a big showy event for Black History Month, or recognizing, your Muslim colleagues over Eid or something like that, or Pride, I'm like, no, actually fix the real root of the problem. Change what's happening day to day. Don't have an event.
It's not a one-off.
I think
it's nice to have, everybody appreciates them for the day it is.
I love them in
I'm Black 365, not just one day. So
exactly.
I need you to respect that and recognize me as an individual and make sure that I have the same vision as everybody else, and don't exclude me from anything because of your bias.
Yeah.
Because what will happen is that, you're going to create an atmosphere where people will start talking amongst themselves and being unhappy. So your employee engagement will go down the Swanee, and then your productivity, your bottom line, will then start to shrink. So I think, they need to recognize people are your organization. If you do not support your people, your organizations cannot thrive.
Yeah. Absolutely, and having that diverse mix of people helps you innovate more. It helps you reach different audiences. It makes your business more successful. End of. So, there was part of me thinking as you were speaking, Dianne, in saying, you have to make everyone feel welcome. Companies might go, oh, that's really difficult because we're all white and we're all Christian and we don't know how to make anyone else feel difficult without making it work. So we'll just stick. So we'll stick to doing what we're doing and we'll be fine. But actually, no, you won't, because that lack of diverse input is what's going to hold you back as an organization. I think it's that double element.
What about reputational damage? Surely you care about your brand, and people leave negatively, because
people are aligning with Trump. That I think some people don't care about their reputational brand.
100%, because obviously the various brands have said, oh, we're not going to do D&I. I say, if they've said that, they didn't want to do it anyway. Why are you wasting your time trying to complain about them? Fine, let them go and do what they want to do. At the end of the day, they've just shown you who they are. So go and find people who are respecting you as an individual and work with them, because
absolutely.
I personally see it as, okay, you've just outed yourself. You've just told me that you are that person, type of organization. Okay, thank you. I won't be using your products. I'll make sure my family don't use your products. And anytime that I can say to somebody, don't use them because of A, B, or C, I'll do that. And I and many other people will do the same. So absolutely. To me, fine, let them do what they want to do. Follow Trump if you want to. But there's so many of us that recognise that, you know, we as human beings work better as a collective.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the fact that we're starting to really see the consequence of those actions now as well. So,
Yes.
you know, the Accenture and TfL thing,
Yes, that was brilliant. Yeah.
getting kicked out of the bid process. I think in the US, the Target and Costco comparison again is evidence. And I think we're going to keep just seeing more of that, because if you work, if you're from any marginalized community or global majority individual and you're working for one of those organizations, they tell you they're rolling back on EDI, you're going to get another job. Might not be today, but why would you stay working somewhere where they've told you you're not respected or valued?
I think we've got to be realistic as well, though, because I think sometimes in an ideal world, in a world, you know, if you're working for an organisation that rolls back their DEI commitments, you know, in an ideal world, you would leave and go and get another job. But there are many people who can't leave; they're not in a position to. And I think that it's really important to recognise and appreciate that group of people and the fact that they are now working in an organisation where they do feel safe.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's really important. You know, they are working in a space now where people are potentially laughing at them when they walk past, or pointing at them, making inappropriate comments, you know, damaging their self-esteem and their self-worth every single day. And I think that's something that needs to be recognised as well, is that all well and good, some of us can leave and go and work somewhere else, but some of us are stuck there, you know, and slowly but surely being mentally tortured, and sometimes physically tortured as a result of, you know, the move to walk away from DEI commitments.
Yeah, absolutely. I acknowledge that. Yeah, it's even for people that can move. Getting a new job isn't a short term. It's not a short process these days. By the time you apply, you get an interview and all that sort of stuff, we've all got bills to pay, right? So we all need to keep earning money in the meantime. So even if it takes, you know, 6, 9, 12, 24 months, I think it's that long-term effect that is slowly going to ripple. And that's where, again, these organizations will suddenly go, oh, we've lost half our people. I didn't like them, but they got the job done. And we can't seem to hire anymore. No one's coming through the doors. You know, we used to get 500 applicants for a role, and now we've got 5. And that's going to be the long-term consequence, I think, from all of this. So it's been brilliant. Thank you, ladies. It was a great discussion, as I was confident it would be. And Grace, I didn't pay you to say it needs to be measured and audited and things, but of course, you know, that's what, as an accreditation, we're all about doing, is providing that benchmark and really taking an intersectional view. And I think then, Dianne, the pay gap and the ethnicity pay gap that a lot of companies don't even think about. That's essential when you've got a culturally diverse workforce. Actually, what checks and measures have you got in place to make sure that your pay and rewards are equitable and fair? And Grace, again, I think with the consulting and the work you do with organizations to help them with these intentional moves, yeah, I think we could have talked for days.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is a very big topic, and you know, there are different angles one can take, areas to explore, but I think in a nutshell we have covered some really good areas that I think that people need to recognise that we need to address them. We need to have more conversations, and you know, meaningful conversations, not just by the water cooler, which is no more these days, by the way, but not just by the water cooler. You know, we need to have proper conversations and meaningful conversations that will result in something positive.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would urge anyone that's watching, if you want to take some intentional action and really move things from the dialogue to the development phase, get in touch. We're all tagged on this, so reach out to us individually, and we'd love to help you move forward. Thanks again, ladies. Been brilliant.
Thank
For
you. Thanks
having
for having
me.
us. Yes,
Thanks.
thank you.